The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining the Demand Forecasting in a Period of Global Crisis webinar with our expert trainer, Feras Mostafa. My name is Simona, and it is my great pleasure to welcome everyone on board. I hope this will be a great learning experience for everyone. To shortly, introduce Feras, he is a supply chain operations professional with over 16 years of hands-on experience in the supply chain field, and he's teaching, one of the famous APICS certified in production and inventory management course. He has, different experience in fields like strategic planning, production planning, demand management, procurement, and inventory management. Before we officially start with the webinar, I'm gonna, if you have any questions, by the end of this webinar, we are going to have like a questions and answer session. So on the right, there should be like a control panel with a section where it says questions. So you can write your question there, and I will be the one, receiving everything from your side. Once Mr. Feras finishes, with the whole presentation, I will try, we will try to answer, as many questions as possible as well. At the moment, we have around 200 participants registered. We are waiting, for the number as well to be a little bit higher. One more thing that I wanted to share with you, one great news is that, by attending this webinar, each of you are granted for a $200 discount coupon that you can use, for our upcoming courses, and a certificate of attendance that each of you will receive on your email address, once the webinar is over. I will leave the floor to Mr. Feras now, and if you have any questions, during the webinar, feel free to once more write them down in the question panel on the right. Feras?
Thank you so much, Simona. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It's really a pleasure, and we're looking forward for a really beneficial session. As Simona said, this session is about demand forecasting during these times, during the pandemic period. It's not very easy. So what we're trying, the objective of the webinar today is basically to go through the status quo and define it maybe a little bit more, and then suggest some of the solutions that we can do, or open ideas on things that we can do to improve how we manage this situation. So I think we can start. We're already 5 minutes now, so I think some people will join maybe in a while. So this is, I think, so I'll just start with a very brief outline what we will be discussing today. So a little bit about me and how am I related to this. And then we will define the current situation. I think most of you are already familiar with the importance of demand management. So this is something that we will not spend so much time on. I would rather spend more time on the 5 topics on the bottom of the slide here. We start with the planning horizons, defining the planning horizons, risk management, a couple of slides about supplier relationship management, customer relationship management, and market intelligence. And then we have a little bit about data management, big data analytics, artificial intelligence. How can we use these things in our favor? And the last part is maybe the most important one, is the human factor, and how we as people should respond to the new situation that we're having here. So the plan is to have like approximately 50 minutes to 60 minutes on the presentation. I don't think we will go further than that, honestly. And then we will have a lot of time, maybe like it depends on your questions, but we'll have some good time to answer any questions and have an open discussion if anyone has anything to add to the discussion here. So this is a little bit about me. I have around 21 years of experience now. Originally a mechanical engineer. I worked in Unilever, in Mars, in Shell, in Kraft, in GSK. I think my experience is mixed between oil field, FMCGs, and pharmaceutical, which is like totally different industries. However, the core of supply chain and the principles remain the same in all of these companies. So it's really interesting to see how different companies approach supply chain and topics like demand management, while the fundamentals are the same everywhere. I became a master APICS instructor in November 2015. Around 5 years ago, so time flies. And since 2017, I'm fully dedicated to trainings and consultancy, and I have more than 1,000 hours of teaching so far. So let's start about the situation with what we're having now. And last week, I was having a quick discussion with a friend of mine. Maybe he's already on the call now, I'm not sure. He's working as the planning manager for a company that sells eyeglasses. And the challenge that he's having, he's working in Dubai, his company is covering maybe the whole Middle East. And the challenge that he's having is that all of his plans are nonsense now. So everything he planned for, maybe they have S&OP, they have very good demand planning, they have supply planning, but all of a sudden, the change was so quick and they're struggling to understand what's going to happen tomorrow, not needless to say next month or next year. So everything, every day comes with a new change and a new surprise. And it turned out, he's telling me it's more of a firefighting mode rather than any sort of planning. And I'm sure that this situation is not only with my friend. I think this situation is with everyone. And even with governments and countries, they're exactly having the same situation. So the current situation, as one economist has defined it, it's a generation-defining moment. He was saying, like, he's a really famous economist. He's called Mohammed Al-Arian. He's originally Egyptian, but living in the US for years. And he was saying that this is something I will remember for the rest of my life. And this is something I will keep telling my students and my family and everyone, that I witnessed this situation, that he has been part of this situation. What we have now is the worst economic crisis since the 30s. And the US and Europe are expecting the economy to shrink by 10%. So I'm not an economist, but our work in supply chain and specifically in demand management is very much related to the economy. So when we hear about 10% shrinkage, that's a big number. And when we hear about numbers in the US saying that the unemployment will reach 25% after being in the top in the last couple of months, that's really interesting. So the situation is really turbulent. Things are changing very quickly for many companies and businesses to adapt with the new situation. What I'm trying to do today is to be realistic. I know that some people are a bit optimistic and some people on the other side are a bit pessimistic, but when we're doing demand management, I would try as much as possible to be realistic, because it will not be in our favor to be either pessimistic or optimistic. So try somehow to be really tackling the real situation and not really like following your emotions or what you hear from people. And I know the social media might be having a very big effect on how people feel. And even now we're hearing about people who are in panic and people who are psychologically stressed because of the situation and being locked down at home and stuff like that. So it's a tough situation, not only for businesses, but for people as well. And we will discuss people in details in the last section. Getting closer to businesses, we see that consumers are changing. The way consumers are doing things is really changing. So I gathered here a couple of few statistics and numbers just to give us an idea how things change in 3 weeks, and these statistics are from 1st till the 21st of March. Statistics are showing that household supplies demand have increased by 76%, which is not surprising. And then you have all the numbers for packaged foods, non-food child products, deli meat, dairy, beverages. Everything is increasing on the consumer side. But if we look at the top, at the bottom of the chart, it says that starting from skincare, school supplies and office supplies, automotive and electronics, they are getting a really big hit. So it might be good news for some companies. It might be really bad news for other companies. However, even for the ones having good news, it might be challenging as well. So if you're working in, we've all heard maybe that Amazon is starting to hire, I think it was a big number. It was like maybe 10,000 or 15,000 people. Imagine you're understaffed, you have a huge demand, you have challenges with logistics and delivery, and you have a huge obligation or responsibility to deliver products to people. So that adds even more stress to the already stressed situation. Of course, we've seen the shift to the online businesses, and yeah, everything is changing now to online, and e-commerce is the booming section now. We can also see that it really differs by categories. So categories are changing, and things are changing from one category to the other. And it really depends where are you on this spectrum. You start thinking like, am I severely hit, or this is an opportunity? Because it's definitely an opportunity for other businesses as well. So in terms of numbers, e-commerce household penetration increased from 13% to 31%. So we can see that, and that's a very interesting point that we will discuss later. The way where people are buying from is changing. So instead of 13% of population only buying from e-commerce, now it's 31%. And there was another statistic saying that this number will keep going up, and people will continue to use the e-commerce in buying their at least grocery, because we're starting to see the switch or the change in the habits, on consumer habits. A rise in the product switching, so 30 to 40% of consumers have been trying new brands and new products. Remember, this is a time of change. Some people will be reluctant to change, they will not be happy with the change, and some people will be very thrilled and they will like absorb it and live with it and try new things. So if your product has a channel to sell things online, definitely this is the time to spend your effort and time on that. Also, we have to understand and always remember there is a huge market uncertainty. Consumers might cut back as much as 40 to 50% of their spending, or 10% on the GDP. In B2B, 50% of companies have cut their short-term spending. Big numbers, big numbers. You will find, these are statistics by McKinsey. You will find always the sources down there. But when you think about it, like 50% of the spend has been cut, that's a huge number for so many smaller companies who have been depending on these businesses. So we will definitely see big shifts going on in the coming period. In terms of supply, if we look at this curve or this graph, it shows the expected stock outs for companies in the EU and the US with suppliers in China by industry, to show us for how long do we expect stock outs. So for example, with pharmaceuticals, we still expect stock outs up till Jan 2021. Maybe the least goes with consumer products, retail and high tech. but it really varies. So this is something interesting, because we have always been in supply chain saying that we have to be agile, you don't have to stop. I've worked in so many companies, so much focused on having the sole supplier for everything, and because we have a sole supplier, we can increase and maximize the benefits with this supplier. Now, if your supplier is sitting somewhere in China and he's affected, or in Italy or in the US, you're in big trouble. So what I'm talking here about is that in the coming period, many of the concepts that we believed in, like sole supplier, I think many people will keep asking themselves and questioning, is this the right model or not? And there will be a lot of debates about that. Already started, but there will be a lot of debates about that. I found I wasn't familiar with these curves, with these diagrams, until recently, honestly. In the economy and in the crisis management or crisis recovery, scientists say that the crisis recovery takes one of these shapes. So we either have this V shape where we fall and then we go up. Sometimes we have the L shape. It takes a long period until we recover. Sometimes it's the W shape where we think that we drop, we have a crisis, we think that we're getting better, and then we have another crisis, and then we go up again, like the W shape. Sometimes it's the O model, which is really bad, where we keep like struggling and going in circles and we cannot get out. We also have the U shape, which is maybe very similar to the V shape, but we have a plateau at the bottom where we stay in the crisis for some time. So this was something new to me, how we can model these crises, but automatically I started to think, are we going to witness a V shape or an L shape or a W shape? And I can easily think of examples for every one of them. So I think it's really hard at the moment to decide which crisis recovery model that we will have. But if I were you, if I am a demand manager or a supply chain manager or someone working in supply chain, I would definitely be interested to know which model the world will follow, my country will follow, or my markets will follow, and what model my company will follow. Because companies will exactly have the same thing like this one, okay? So it's really interesting to think how the world will react to that in the coming period. Effect on supply chain, yeah, we can all feel it, we can all sense it. It's really interesting. I have a friend in the US, and I was in the US at the beginning of the year, and she was asking me, what do you do exactly? And I told her I work in supply chain, and she told me, like, what do you do exactly? I don't understand. Sometimes I hear this word, but I really don't understand what do you mean by supply chain. A couple of weeks ago, she called me and told me that now everyone talking in the news about supply chain. So in the US, all the media is talking about like making products available with the right quality, with the right quantity, right on time, with the right cost. The things that we have always been thinking about, now it's on news and everyone is thinking about it. The effect on supply chain is huge, and this is some statistics saying that 938 out of Fortune 1000 companies have a tier 1 or tier 2 supplier that has been affected by the virus. And when I say affected by the virus, means that the company, 938 companies of the big 1,000 companies are affected by the virus. So that's really, again, big numbers. So having said this, defining the current situation, how can we do things differently, or how can we try to do things differently? Before we go to that, I'll just quickly discuss this. Why do we need to forecast? For some people maybe who are questioning this. I always say that demand forecasting is the starting point of the supply chain. And the reason for that is I need to know how much is requested or required by my end consumer first, and then we start to model everything backwards up till buying from our suppliers. So this cycle cannot be run efficiently if we don't have a proper forecast. And unfortunately, at the moment, our forecasts are not accurate as they used to be. So I know that most of the companies have been struggling with the forecast. Now we are even more struggling with the forecast, and we can see like even governments struggling to know what's going to happen in few weeks ahead. So we need forecast to plan the capacity and resources and define how much muscles we need. We the forecast because all our processes and functions will depend on the volume of this forecast. Firms that make standard products need to have sellable goods immediately available. I always think, imagine that you are the planning manager of the company that produces masks, for example. That will be a very stressful time, or ventilators or something like that. That's a life-saving actually. That will be a really, really tough time. Firms that use make to order cannot begin making products, not just because they don't have customer orders confirmed, but also they have a problem with supplying the components of the product that they make. So it's for those companies, it's challenging from both sides. Actually, it's for everyone. You have a challenge securing the demand and understanding the demand very well, and you also have a challenge securing the supplies or the raw materials or the components that you have to link them together. So this is the situation. And here I'm referring to the APICS slides about demand management. And when I thought about this webinar and the demand, I couldn't stop myself thinking of these three circuits. How you can manage the demand. And I always say it's much smarter if you can control the demand rather be reactive to the demand. And that's what I've always been telling people a long time ago. Like, why do we have to sit and just expect customer orders while we can shape these customer orders in our favor and change them in our favor? Of course, this doesn't apply in all industries, but as much as we can. And in APICS CPIM here, and in many APICS material, APICS defines three parameters or three areas that you can use to manage this demand. The first one is marketing, okay? And maybe most of you are familiar already with the 5 Ps, 7 Ps, how we can use marketing to change or direct the demand in our favor. Is this still applicable today? Definitely. Maybe the marketing channels have changed, but definitely people are still sitting on social media and seeing ads or seeing directions. So this is one thing that you can play with. We will discuss this in the solutions later on. The second one is customer relationship management. And I always say these days, if you have spent good time with your customers in the past, building good relationship with your customers, whether it's a retail, a B2B business, whatever the business is, if you know your customer well and you have good communication channels with your customer, you will definitely can reap the benefits of this these days. The third one is demand planning, which is basically using the historical data and the numbers that you had, your sales numbers, your demand numbers in the past, and then you use this to come up with future numbers. And of course, there is a big challenge here because our historical numbers might not be really helpful these days. So if I compare March 2020 with March 2019, definitely the numbers are different, and there is no way to anticipate that very well. And we always say that when you are using forecasting techniques, we have qualitative methods and quantitative methods. Qualitative methods is basically the experience of people in the business or in the industry. So we can always go back to the people, the experts in the industry, whether it's oil field, pharmaceutical, consumer goods, whatever it is. There must be someone in your business who is old enough, who is experienced enough, who has witnessed this similar situations. I highly doubt that anyone witnessed something like that, but someone who witnessed similar situations and who can give his input, and probably his input might be very helpful to a lot of people. The other part is the quantitative methods, and this is where we use numbers, and this is where we use historical data, simulation models, and all of these things. Okay, so the purpose of this part basically is just to remind you and get you back to the basics. So if you are working in supply chain, you have to ask yourself now, am I utilizing those 5 concepts on this slides or not? It's not an easy question. The result will not be very easy. I understand it requires a lot of work, but that's a very good starting point. You should organize your work so that on these 5 parameters, okay? We will discuss most of them in more details going forward. Now, we discussed the previous situation. We understand the situation that we are in. We've seen some numbers. We know that it's not very helpful in the coming period. We have tackled quickly the basics of demand management, which is really important for us to go back to the basics and remember how we should do demand management. Now, I have 5 categories or 5 points I want to mention to you. I think they might be very helpful to solve this dilemma. The first one is the planning horizons. I think because we are very stressed and we have a lot of firefighting, we automatically start forgetting about the planning levels, as we call them in supply chain. The strategic, the business planning level, the sales and operations planning horizon, and the master production scheduling horizon. Of course, these horizons differ from one industry to the other. So if I'm working in Boeing or Airbus, these horizons 3 to 18 months means nothing to me. If I'm working in manufacturing ice cream, yes, that might be applicable as well. So my first advice is remember your planning levels and these planning horizons. Don't lose the focus. Don't lose the compass. You still have to plan for the strategic level, for the business level, and your S&OP level. You still have to do the forecast for these periods, although we are not sure how the numbers will look like. And I can fully understand if I'm a demand planner and the business asks me to put a forecast for the coming year or for till the end of this year, I can understand how challenging this can be. It's really challenging. I fully understand that. But the question is, are you willing to just leave it and do nothing, or start thinking about it and challenging yourself and asking for data and connecting with people and so on? So you have to start, and you have to keep your S&OP effective and running with the maximum capacity. This is the time you need the S&OP the most. The second thing is also the master scheduling, your short-term plans. You should see whether you have a 3-month short-term plan or 6 months or 1 year. You should see the schedule very well. And I understand that you will be changing it maybe on daily basis. Still, you should have the foundation, okay? The second part that you should be doing is risk management. Lucky companies or smart companies, I always say this, smart companies have done their homework before. They've done the risk management properly. They have created different scenarios for crisis. It might not be the same crisis. We didn't expect that. We didn't expect COVID-19, and we didn't have a plan exactly for COVID-19. However, if you have done your crisis management homework properly, you definitely have proper mitigation plans, at least on hand, okay? You have to change quickly, switch quickly from being reactive to proactive. Think about it this way. Am I able to shape my future, or at least the short-term future, or am I totally helpless? It's challenging, but this is how we have to think about it. You have to understand your critical vulnerabilities and take action to spread the risk. I think most of you have already seen that. Eliminating risk, transferring risk, containing risk. Think about it these ways. Am I able to eliminate the risk? Absolutely not, if you're talking about the COVID-19 now. Maybe smaller risks, yes, but the big pandemic, no, we cannot do anything about it. The second one is transferring the risk. Is there a way I can move this risk somewhere else? If possible, yes. Third one is, if I have to live with this risk, can I contain it? Can I make the best out of what I have at the moment? This is how you should start thinking. The other thing is creating business continuity plans, plan B, contingency, planning. If you don't have a plan right now, you're already late. Maybe you had to live with a plan without really thinking about it. So the moment companies said you're not allowed to go, the moment governments said you're not allowed to go to work anymore, you automatically switch to online and working from home. Maybe this is not a situation that we planned for, but it happened. It's our continuity plan at the moment. Think about it this way. Try to see what's gonna happen next and prepare for that. The last bullet I'm putting here is just a reminder. How do we do risk management? First step, risk identification. Second step, risk assessment. And you do that by calculating your likelihood and your consequences for this risk. And then once we can quantify the risks and sort them from the biggest to the lowest, we start thinking of the tools and the contingency plans and the techniques that we will use to manage this risk. Okay, so that's the second point, and I think that's really helpful. I know that for the sake of time here, we are trying to be a bit quick, but I'm just trying to give bullet points, you know, like the first one, planning horizons. The second one is risk management. Again, for those who have thought about these things in the past, before the pandemic, and those who were well prepared, maybe things will be much easier now. For those who didn't have a risk management exercise, who didn't evaluate the risks, who didn't put contingency plans and business continuity plans, BCPs, before the pandemic, those must be really challenged at the moment. The third point, and I think this is maybe one of the biggest and the easiest parts that you have to start working upon. The first, I divided into 3 parts because the three of them fall under the same concept. Supplier relationship management, customer relationship management, and information intelligence. 3 things that we have to take care of. Let me first remind you of our supply chain, and maybe you're already familiar with this. We have the supply chain flows from suppliers to consumers. Suppliers, manufacturer, or product maker, or trader, or whatever, distribution, and then consumers. We always see the flow of material flowing from the left to the right, from suppliers to consumers. And The second thing is information flow, which is going both ways actually, from suppliers to consumers and from consumers to suppliers. And the third flow is the financial flow that's going from the consumers to the suppliers. The question is, are you familiar in your supply chain with these flows? And when I say familiar, I don't mean you just know them. You know them definitely. But the question is, do you have this information that we're talking about? Do you have the channels for information flow between suppliers and consumers and vice versa, or not? If you in the past have spent money and time and effort to create databases where you get consumer feedback, you build good relationships with your consumers, and you use this feedback to enrich and change and take decisions in your supply chain, you're lucky, because now is the time to build on your relationship with your customers or your consumers again. Also, with the financial part, companies now are struggling to collect their money in many situations. And that's something that you have to be really careful with, because it's the blood for the company. So if I don't get paid on time, probably I will not be able to pay salaries. And that's the situation we don't want to be in. So those three parameters, SRM, CRM, and information intelligence. We will talk about each one of them in a little bit of details. The first one is supplier relationship management. How well you know your suppliers. Do you know your suppliers really well? Do you know your first tier supplier or your second tier supplier or up to the third and fourth tier supplier? And there is a very interesting business case about Nissan, and it was popular in many forums, how Nissan managed the tsunami that happened in 2011. If you didn't see this business case, there are different versions of it. There are like really long ones, and there is one that's only one pager. But that's a really business case, a role model that it's really interesting to see, because Nissan in the year of 2011 were able to grow against all odds, against all companies, automotive companies. They used the crisis to make money because they were very well prepared with the contingency plans. They had very good relationships with their suppliers, and up till their tier 4 suppliers were visible to them. In January 2020, companies have mapped their supply chains already, knew which parts and raw materials were originating from Wuhan, Hubei areas, and they could easily manage their supplier network. So the first thing I would advise you to do is you review your supplier network. And that requires a lot of work from planning people and your procurement people. Here, it's just a reminder of, I personally love this matrix, the Kraljic Matrix, because it puts your suppliers and your items in 4 quadrants based on the profit impact they have on you and the supply risk they have on you. If you're not familiar with the Kraljic Matrix, let me explain it very quickly with you. So basically, the Kraljic Matrix tells you if your item, whether it's a strategic item, leverage item, non-critical item, or a bottleneck item. And you can define that by deciding whether this item has a supply risk or not, or it has a profit impact on you or not. For example, if you have an item that's produced in Wuhan or in Italy, and it's a major component of your product that you're producing, or a major item on your menu or your selling price list, then it's a strategic item. And how you manage strategic items, that's the beauty of the Kraljic Matrix. Once you decide which ones are my strategic items, you spend the effort and the resources of your business on the strategic items first. Secure your strategic items first. That's number 1. And then you can think of the bottlenecks, you can think of the leverage, and probably you will not have time to think of the non-critical items. For example, stationery is a non-critical item. So it will not, you probably will not reach this point. So back to the SRM idea, know your suppliers, map them very well, go up to as much as you can with your tiers of suppliers, build your Kraljic Matrix, at least for the important items, and based on that, decide how you will tackle your supply in the coming period. Another thing I want to mention about the supplier relationship management is that using your suppliers, you can sense what's happening in the rest of the market, even with your competitors. I'm not talking about anything unethical here, but if I go to my supplier, I know that he's providing also my competitor, and my supplier says, I'm sorry, I'm busy for the coming month. Probably he's busy with my competitor. So it's a period where you need a lot of information, again, in ethical manners, but information will be very helpful and powerful at the moment. The second part, which is really important, is the customer relationship management. If you have spent, again, a lot of effort with your suppliers in the past, now it's time to reap that. Consumer behavior sometimes is unpredictable. Think of the toilet paper, for example. Automated forecasting models, think of historical business data. If you have a demand forecasting tool, software, probably it will look into March, April, May 2019 and 2018 and 2017 and think of numbers, because it's a system, it's a software. It's stupid because it doesn't know that there is a pandemic running now in the world. And therefore, there is a lot of focus on qualitative forecasting. And that's what I mentioned at the beginning, qualitative versus quantitative forecasting. That's the other thing. The third thing is you have to put a strategy based on the data that you have, and probably you will have, let me not call it strategy because it's not a long-term thing, but if you have a plan for your customers, you will have probably to change this plan very often. Know your customers. If you don't know your customers, this is the time you need to know your customers in order to help you with the demand. If you have a customer who represents 30–40% of your business, and you know these people well, and you have always maintained good relationship with them, and you have always visited them, physical visits, and you know them personally, and you have personal relationships with them, it's time now to build on this relationship and have regular meetings with them and ask them, how can we improve? And what are their expectations to the demand in the coming period? Here, just one slide about qualitative forecasting. Yes, it's based in intuition, on judgment, on trends that we see. It basically depends on external relationships. We try to think what happened in the past and think, okay, since this happened in 2008 and 2009, let's think what should happen this time as well. If you have the data for 2008, 2009, maybe this is the data that you can think about and use now, because there are similarities between the situation now after almost 11 years. You will have to take knowledgeable decisions, not just decisions. I know there will be stress to take decisions fast. However, it has to be built on data. Data will improve your forecast, and I know that you might not get the best data that you wish for. However, start with some data that you have, and on the go, you can improve and clear this data and make it look better. The fourth thing, and we only have 5, so don't worry, I'm not talking much going forward. Data management, big data analytics, and artificial intelligence. These things, at least in the Middle East, they sounded like a luxury. in the last couple of years, I was deeply involved in big data analytics and AI models and stuff like that. And companies were telling me, do we really need that? And I'm always saying, yes, it's helpful. They will help you to analyze your data in a much better and faster model. And they can act as simulations. They can predict the future somehow based on the data that they get. Yes, sometimes some of them depend on the historical data, but you have the choice to eliminate this historical data and start building analytical models based on the data that you have. One survey done here says that 43% of the people who responded to this survey said that analytics is at the front of their activities, helping their organizations make major decisions. Okay, 43%, almost half. And another 39.9, which is another 40%, executives relying on analytics, and some are not. So it's not a very 100% situation. But the question is, do you in your company have an analyst or have the tools to do some data analytics? And what's the quality of this data analytics? I know it might be very late for a company now to invest in big data analytics, or even like, how come we are in a time of a crisis, you want me to spend money on big data analytics tools and softwares and stuff like that? Again, you don't have to go for the fanciest things, but think of it this way. If you don't have the analysis, you will take wrong decisions and you will come up with a wrong demand. And if you come with the wrong demand, imagine how much you will pay in the coming period because of wrong decisions that you might take in the coming period. So it's really important to spend a lot of time and effort in your data analytics. Gartner, and some of you maybe already know Gartner, they have key ways. They're thinking of some ways, or two mainly, that can help you benefit from the data analytics. The first one is generate business and recovery scenarios. And that's what I urge you to start doing. Don't put one plan ahead. Start putting scenarios. Get into the habit of, we will put this plan, and if things go wrong, we will go with this plan, and then we will go with this plan. This is how you should plan in the coming period. Because very soon, when things get maybe worse or better, the changes will be very quick for you to replan. You need to have the scenarios ready, or at least drafts of scenarios ready. The other thing is early discovery of business trends. I remember very well at the beginning of the COVID-19 situation, I was very interested by two countries. The UK, when Boris Johnson came up in the news and said, expect you will lose some of your loved ones. And we had his health consultant, I don't remember his name, but he was talking in numbers and statistics. And at that time, people were really surprised of what are they thinking about? Whether it went right or wrong, but we have to think this way of how we can use data to analyze the situation. The other country is Germany. And I think they also had a unique way of thinking based on their capacity in the healthcare system to decide how they want to tackle the situation. So my advice to you is you have to be informed very well on the trends. What's happening? Are you really up to date with all the changes that's happening in your environment, in your country, in your area, in your business, in your industry? If you're in the oil field, for example, that's a really challenging time for everyone. So you have to be updated. And if you have good data analytics tools, whether the fancy ones or just an Excel sheet, try to use them with the data that you have. The more scientific you do that analysis, the better demand that you can develop. The last part here is about developing predictive analytical models. And I can understand that sounds like really complicated, but it really differs from one industry to the other, and it depends on the tools that you have. In the coming slide, we will talk about the guidelines for forecasting using analytics. Few things just to bear in mind. The first one is consumer behavior. You have to ask yourself these 5 questions very well, and you should have very detailed and accurate, as much as you can, answers for these questions. Consumer behavior, categories that you're working in, channels of sales or reaching your customer or consumer, and your consumer themselves, portfolio and your brand, and finally the price tiers that you're working in. Just generic questions, but you have to answer these questions to be able to forecast better. My last part that I want to discuss with you is the human factor. At the end of the day, we're all humans, and we are perceiving the situation or reacting the situation in different ways. I don't know if you're familiar with the MBTI. I'm a trainer in the MBTI as well, and I'm really interested in this topic. And when you think of people, you see that people are different, and therefore their reaction to the situation will be quite different as well. First thing is, don't panic. Try not to panic. Imagine that you are an employee in a company that's struggling at the moment, and I have a family, I have financial obligations, and immediately people will start thinking, will my company lay me off or not? Imagine the situation of this person, and I know that a lot of people are thinking this way now. We have to have a plan B in case our company lays us off. Someone was telling me recently, he opens the LinkedIn and it feels like a grave area. Like everyone is whining, everyone is weeping, everyone is mentioning that he has been laid off and he's looking for a job. Very sad situation. However, we have to think of our employees and how to not make them panic, at least as long as the situation is not worth panicking. The second thing is, get ready to take a lot of decisions, much more and much quicker than you used to do, with much less certainty. Now it's the time that you will take decisions based on that much information, but you have to take the decision quickly. Plans will change, and accept that plans will change, but try to make the change smooth, frequent, and consistent. I know this is difficult, but that's the situation we are in. Try to convey this message to your teams as well. Create like daily meetings, even for 10-15 minutes, just to boost their morale, make them understand that we are in exceptional times and things has to be done in an exceptional way these ways. Embrace change, accept it. Again, people are different, but we don't have much choices, honestly. Never forget your people. Put them as a priority. Now it's the time to show how genuine and how ethical you can be to your employees. I own a company, I have employees, and trust me, it's not easy. I know that. You are under a lot of stress, but you have to, I'm not saying that you cheat or misguide your teams. Be very transparent with them. However, don't panic. A backup plan is needed for people as well. Imagine, now I'm hearing situations about like a company where many people in this company got the COVID-19, and these people have to go to hospitals. Think of contingency plans inside your business for the people as well, whether it's automation, working from home, do whatever you can think of, because this can be really helpful. Remember, that also working from home might be very nice to some people and very challenging to other people. Some people are ready, they have the places, maybe they don't have toddlers or babies. Other people on the other side might have babies, they don't have enough space to create their own working environment. And I'm sure you can see a lot of advice, pictures, studies on how you can maximize your efficiency while working from home. So that's something also that you can think about. I'm done with what I wanted to say. I hope it's helpful. I'm just adding a couple of extra resources at the end of the presentation. So this is a business case by PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers. I think it's really interesting. It's not very long. It's really interesting, and it covers a lot of things. Also, there is a proposed framework. It comes from McKinsey, this framework about how you should tackle your supply chain or recovery to your situation. So it focuses on 6 areas, and I think it's also helpful. I'm adding the links to these websites at the bottom. Maybe it will be helpful for anyone who's interested to know more about that. Again, thank you so much for your time. I'll be interested to hear a lot of your questions. Just one last thing I want to mention is I might not have the magical wand or the magical solution for the situation, because this situation is beyond anyone's capacity. However, the reason of this webinar and how I try to build this presentation is to make it as inspiring as possible. I'm just trying to open doors, open windows for your thinking to think about. And we have almost 250 people here from different industries and different backgrounds and different geographies and so on. The purpose of this slideshow is to make you think if there is anything from these areas that you can take further in your business or in your life and apply, and hopefully you will see some improvement on your demand. So I'm done here. Simona, I don't know if you have questions or you would like to share anything with the rest of the guys.
Of course. Thank you, Feras, once again, for the great presentation. We have received, many questions here. So I'll try, to just read some of the questions that we have received. In the meantime, let's see here, Mr. Ibrahim is asking, during crisis, all distributors tend to increase their safety stock. Do you agree that the bullwhip effect risk will increase in this time?
Yes, thank you very much. That's a really good question. And I was thinking about it. I was giving a training a couple of days ago, and we mentioned the bullwhip effect. And companies, for those of you who don't know the bullwhip effect, it's basically when everyone in the supply chain starts to build extra stocks because they are worried what will happen next. So everyone in the supply chain starts to build some extra stocks than his actual needs, and so on. And then you end up, if you look at the total supply chain, you end up with a huge extra quantity that you really don't need. My question to you, Ibrahim, is, my answer to you, Ibrahim, is it really depends on the industry. I fully understand if some distributors are building stock because they see that the situation will continue for another couple of months. So if I'm talking about grocery items, I don't think that will be wasted stock, because we have seen trends for people buying in crazy manners just because of the panic. However, you as a manufacturer or anyone in the middle of this supply chain where people are doing the bullwhip effect or building stocks, my advice to you is to have the full visibility on the rest of the supply chain. So if you are a manufacturer, don't just be happy because your distributor is asking for more stock and building stocks. Because if your distributor keep building stocks and then the situation gets better, what will happen to you? You will stop producing for a couple of months. And you don't want this situation again. We want to flatten the curve in the supply chain as well. We don't want to have a huge stock at the distributor and then the factory stops working and so on. So my advice is get connected with your supply chain, see their stocks, and as a team, all of you try to connect together and share information. You remember this arrow of information going back and forth across the supply chain? That's exactly what you need to do at the moment. And that's exactly what you have to do with your suppliers and with your customers as well. So I hope I'm answering. There is no right and wrong answer for your question because the situation can differ from one industry to the other. But the bottom line is you need to see the full picture.
All right, good. Thanks for the answer. We have a couple more questions. Mr. Mitchell is asking, will the boost in e-commerce be the norm or just as a byproduct of the pandemic?
Based on the numbers, I even shared, I think, a couple of these numbers in the presentation a few minutes ago. People are starting to see new things, to try new things, products and channels of buying. And the second thing is probably there is a very high expectation that people will continue to buy through e-commerce in the coming few years. So e-commerce was already booming. Now, as if the COVID has given it an extra push. And my personal view is that e-commerce will not go backwards again. Actually, it will keep flying even more because people have tried it. People have thought, yeah, why not? It's working, it's good. And even companies are developing and improving how they do their e-commerce. So it will become even more pampering to the end consumer. And then the consumer will get used to it and think like, okay, I will go with e-commerce even further in new things that I never thought I will use. I'm seeing, for example, e-commerce for furniture at the moment. And people are buying desks and sofas even much more with e-commerce, which is, yeah, if it was me, I would love to see and try the sofa at the beginning. But people are like, yeah, I will buy it. If I have a problem, I'll bring it back. So even furniture is people are buying it with online now.
All right. Do we have time for a couple more questions or?
Please.
All right, great. All right, I apologize if I pronounced the name wrong. Sanyasi is asking how far it is valid or acceptable that the forecast goes deviated from the actual demand, such as we forecast something and the actual differs a lot, and how to manage this, if you can give like a suggestion. Sorry, it was a long question.
No problem. But I think it's a very you cannot really even accept a certain percentage of deviation from forecast at the moment. And I'll tell you why. If I had a forecast for March and then I got the situation just burst and the numbers went much higher than what I expected or much lower than what I expected, no one would ever expect the changes that's happening in March and April and May. No one would, like even a genius will never expect these changes. At the beginning, in February, I was in the US and everyone was taking the COVID-19 situation very lightly because people thought like it's sitting in China and yeah, who cares? It's miles and miles away from us. And look at the US right now. So I think it will be very harsh to put a number for yourself and say that I failed to achieve a certain demand forecasting accuracy for the coming period. However, I think if you fluctuate by 10 or 20%, you're perfect. I wouldn't say this number 6 months ago. I would say like 10% is high, but now if you fluctuate your actual sales versus your forecast are like 20% different, 30% different, I wouldn't blame you, to be honest. I would rather think, how can we use the numbers to get better numbers next month, and how can we maximize the benefits from the current situation, rather than just looking at the number of forecast accuracy and judging ourselves. I'm not sure if this answered your question very well, but this is how I see it, honestly.
Good, good. I think I found a very good question. I mean, I'm very interested to hear the answer to this one as well. This question is by Hidayatullah. I apologize if I pronounced the name wrong. When we're doing the forecast, after forecast, do we consider the crisis period history sale or better to skip? What is your advice here to make more powerful forecasts for post-COVID?
So I assume your question is, my understanding is, do we consider, for example, the sales of Q1 or Q2 of 2019 and use them in our numbers now? The answer is yes and no, and I'll explain how. Yes, definitely you need to have a base. And it's not just the absolute numbers, it's the proportionality between your products that you're selling. So for example, I'm selling two products, product A and product B. It has always been product A, 70% of my sales, product B is 30% of my sales. So this proportionality, you can still use it these days because, of course, it depends on the situation, but you can still use the same proportions between A and B and assume that A will be 70% of your demand today and B will be 50% of your demand today. The question is about, this is for the yes, how you can use your historical data. Proportionality is just an example. If there is anything that you can get out of your historical data, use it now. However, no, because the absolute numbers will definitely change. I don't know which industry you are in, but if you are in consumer goods, for example, definitely the numbers will change. And therefore, the numbers, the historical numbers cannot be very helpful. However, if I have the historical numbers, and if I have my market share, and if I read in the newspapers or look at any research company or even the government statistics saying that there is a shrinkage in the dairy sales, in the dairy industry by 20%, and I'm working in the dairy industry, I know my market share, I know my historical data. Will you be able to get estimates for this time? Yes, absolutely. Because you're using your historical data and you know your market share and you know how big the market is and you know how much this market shrank or increased. And based on all this data, you can just put them together and start getting rough estimates for the total industry. And then from this total industry numbers, you can get your market share, the new market share today. And then from that, you can get, with the proportionality that I mentioned, you can get the forecast on every SKU. So I think you can use this data. Information is always helpful. You can use this data somehow to get up with new forecasts.
Good. Thank you so much for the answer, Feras. Do we have time for one more question, or?
Sure. Let's do one.
Yeah, this will be the last one. So let's see here. Just give me 1 second. Right over here. I think Ibrahim is asking this question as well. Do you think in this period quality forecasting is much important than quantitative? Coming to quantitative, it shall be extrinsic range from statistics, since indicators play a big role at the moment.
Yes, to a big extent, the focus now will be on qualitative methods. And the reason I'm saying that, because the quantitative methods are basically depending on historical data. which is totally not accurate at the moment. So you cannot just rely on a software that has the data of 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, and go to this software and tell me how much I'm gonna sell in June 2020. Absolutely, you will get wrong numbers. And that's why the qualitative methods are quite important at the moment. The only part that we can use also from the quantitative methods is the extrinsic numbers, or the extrinsic methods that or things that we can get from the environment we are working on. For example, if I'm working in let's say in the construction industry, I make door handles, for example, or I make doors, for example, and I see in the newspaper or in the news that there is a shrinkage in the speed of building new houses by 10%. That's an extrinsic data. That's a piece of information that's happening outside that I can use to come up with my own numbers. So this is where you can use the numbers, but depending solely only on historical data definitely will not work. It will not work.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Feras, for your time. I'm not sure if you were able to see, we had a lot of, positive comments for your presentation and the way, you answered the questions. So I will make sure to share with you all the positive comments after the webinar.
I cannot see them here, so please send them to me.
Of course,
Thank you.
Also, on behalf, LEORON, Mr. Feras, and myself, I want to say it was a great pleasure to have, everyone as part of this webinar. I really do hope, that we have exceeded everyone's expectations here. I wanted to share, small info and invite all of you to our upcoming APICS Certified in Production and Inventory Management live instructor-led training session that we are going to have, in the month of June, starting June 7th until 11th. This program, covers topics as demand, forecasting, inventory, material planning, and production planning and scheduling. Some topics that we have, covered during this webinar as well. And once again, I would like to say thanks to everyone that joined in. And, with any questions, feel free to approach me on my email or through LinkedIn. I believe most of you have my contact details, so feel free, to approach me at any time. Thank you so much, Feras, once again.
Thank you, everyone.
Everyone have a great day.
Bye.